In this video, let's talk about disaster recovery in Power Platform. Now, disaster recovery basically it protects your data within the environment. Now, it has got a systems to stay resilient during unavoidable outages or disruptions if you enable disaster recovery. So, if a disaster strikes to your data center, then disaster recovery kicks in and then it basically protects your data. And in case of a severe failure, it will allow you to recover the data from the uh, different data center. Now, disaster recovery is a part of the business continuity plan. It is available to only environment of type production over here. So you cannot have disaster recovery for any other environment type like uh, trial or developer or other those kind of environment type. It is only available for production environment. Self-service disaster recovery is Power Platform infrastructure capability that replicates environments across far distances. So it all depends on how your data structure, how your data center is structured. So you get something called as data center, then we have an availability zone, and then we have geo redundancy or locally redundant services. So this is like part of the Azure infrastructure, which basically protects your entire Power Platform infrastructure. Now, what happens in case of a disaster is like it will initiate a failover between regions in a self-serve manner. Now, environment must be of type managed environment. So this is also an important consideration to make. If your environment is a managed environment, then you'll be able to leverage the capability of the disaster recovery. Also, it does not operate on your license basis, depending on how many Power Apps, Power Automate, or Copilot Studio license you have. Uh, this is a separate service billing, so you need to have as a pay as you go billing plan configured within your environment because this is all dependent on how you consume the service. So it all you need to have a Azure pay as you go billing plan. Now, pay as you go feature basically is required to enable the disaster recovery functionality. Now, one-time action provision resources and starts process of data replication. So it's like kind of like a one-time action. So you provision the resources and it will start processing of the data replication. So data is basically replicated between the primary location and the secondary location, and the entire process may take approximately 48 hours to complete. Last time when I did that disaster recovery configuration, it took around 20-24 hours, but at the max you can assume that it takes 48 hours to complete. Again, it depends on how many data, like what kind of data you have within your environment and how are you utilizing different environment sets within the Power Platform infrastructure. Existing environment has no impact on its performance. So when this entire process takes place, the existing production environment will have no impact. So there's no issue from that perspective. So you can start that disaster recovery process without even impacting the current environment. So you may need to configure something from an Azure resource perspective. So basically, it's a geography that includes at least one Azure region, and one Azure region is made up of three different availability zone. Now you can read through the Learn document over there, which I have kept over here, so you can go through the Learn document. I will show you that content in some time. Now, from a benefit perspective, like basically you are protecting your environment, so you're protecting your corporate data or your business data, so it's always on. Resilience is replicated across multiple availability zones, and then it is continuously active, and then it's got a faster recovery time. It has got a reduced support dependency with Microsoft support. So with the help of automation, it will basically allow you to recover the content very easily in case the disaster strikes. So these are like some of the screenshot. So you go to the environment, you see disaster recovery option, and then you turn on the disaster recovery. Now, from a concept perspective, how it works is you have got an availability zone. So if you see this example, availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3 in a Azure region plane. Uh, and the blue thing which you see over here is a Azure geography. Now, disaster recovery, this is like a separate system over here. So you have got availability zone 1, which is comprised of one or more data centers, and then there's a diverse fiber paths connecting between different availability zones. So as you see over here, different AZ1, AZ2, AZ3 is all connected with one or more data centers. It is connected through a diverse fiber path. And then with the plane of ASHI geography, you have the data being transferred to a different geography or different location. In case of the disaster strike, you will be able to recover the content very easily. Now, if I navigate to Power Platform Admin Center, navigate to the environment, let me pick up a sandbox environment over here. Now, if I go to the sandbox environment, I will not be able to see anything sort of disaster recovery. If I go into a default environment, I cannot recover a default environment because this is all taken care internally by Microsoft. But if I select an environment of type production, so I've got two production environment type over here. So if I select production environment type, I go into three dots, I get an option of disaster recovery. Or if I click three dots over here, I'll be able to see an option of disaster recovery. Now I'll click on disaster recovery over here, and then it will ask me to set up a pay as you go plan. So if I click on disaster recovery, it says enabling this feature will upgrade this environment's business continuity capability to include self-serve disaster recovery during regional outage and to perform disaster recovery drills. So a pay as you go billing plan is required. Now I haven't configured over here. Once I have the pay as you go billing plan configured, then I can turn on the disaster recovery, and then the disaster recovery process will kicks in, and then it will start replicating the content in a different specific geography. Now, if you want to read more about how to configure the business continuity and disaster recovery, navigate to this document. So, Microsoft provides business continuity and disaster recovery capabilities to all production type environments for both Dynamics 365 and Power Platform SaaS application. Now, there are different configurations of built in disaster recovery in region with Azure Availability Zone. So, you can have a read through that. You can backup of production environment. What is the benefit of it? Cross region self service disaster recovery. And how do we turn on the self service disaster recovery? So, this is the example which we have seen how to configure the disaster recovery. There's not much configuration, it's just that you need to click on disaster recovery and then the disaster recovery kicks in. Now you might want to turn on disaster recovery for other event, like if you have a drill being conducted or emergency response for a major regional outage. So this is very much important to first conduct a drill, because you may configure disaster recovery, but then you may forget some of the bits and pieces, and then in case of an actual disaster you'll not be able to recover the content. So from a disaster recovery drill perspective, basically what happens is your copy of a production environment uh, will get replicated in a different geography or a different location, and then you can test as if the disaster has actually taken place. So, for example, you might want to copy a production environment to a sandbox environment and then change the type from sandbox to production. So, this is how you can uh, perform that drill. And you can read through the other content. There are like a lot of frequently asked questions, like it all talks about what are the costs associated with using self-service disaster recovery. So capacity charges are based on the consumptions of the environment spread region. So an environment is comprised of the database, file, and log storage capacity. So if I navigate to the environment over here, if I close this over here, then if I go into say Dataverse, then here you will be able to see different analytics with regards to Dataverse. Also, if I go into a specific environment, and if I click on a specific environment over here, I'll be able to see the configuration, like where it is located. So the region, what is the environment ID, what is the Dataverse version, whether the release wave is configured or not, and then any action you perform within the environment, you'll be able to see the full history over here. So what all actions you have performed within the environment. Now if I go into monitor, then I can see other options in terms of setting up an alert, setting up a log, setting viewing all the power apps, power automated details. So if I go to licensing, then here I get Dataverse. Now in a Dataverse, we have different sort of storages. So we have database, log, and file. So this is the same items which have been talked over here. So it says capacity charges are based on the consumption of the environment spared region for database, file, and log storage types. Capacity consumption is reflected in the familiar licensing experience with a Power Platform Admin Center. And how does the billing work for self-service disaster recovery? So if your environment is configured to draw capacity from your tenant's database capacity, then you need to have that specific capacity within your environment. And also pay as you go billing plan is still required so that you can avoid those capacity overages. And what if can I switch regions during a regional outage? In the case of a regional outage, the system supports failover to a designated secondary region as a part of the self-service disaster recovery, but it doesn't allow switching to any arbitrary region. So every region has a called a primary region and the secondary region. Now you cannot shift between the those regions. Those all things are already configured within the Azure ecosystem. And how to disable the self-service disaster recovery is like just turn off the disaster recovery from Power Platform Admin Center. You just need to uncheck the turn on disaster recovery check options. So that's it, folks. This is how you can basically configure disaster recovery in Power Platform environment. Thanks for watching.